panelists. What I'm going to do as a starting point is perhaps ask you panelists to introduce yourself and in no particular order. Can I start with Super Cecil, please?
Hi, Kapil. Since I'm I am currently an HR manager at Netcare Femina. It's a hospital based in Pretoria. It's a specialized hospital where we look after mother and child. I've been in the medical field now for close to 10 years, but I've worked in other sectors as well. I form part of an executive team with the internal team, which is based at the hospital. And I'm looking forward to giving input on today's topic.
Excellent. Thank you, Sibusi. So can I ask Theo to also briefly introduce himself?
Good afternoon. Thanks. Theo Groenewald here. I head up data management in Discovery Central Services at Discovery Limited. We're a team that build data products for our stakeholders in business around the customer and how the customer engages with Discovery. I've been in the IT sector for about 25 years now and specializing in data for about 10. So yeah, looking forward to chatting to you about data affects HR. Thanks.
Thank you, Theo. Can I ask Candice to introduce herself, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Candice. I'm an industrial psychologist by profession. Currently serving as the Human Capital Director for Interconnect Systems. We are a infrastructure, cabling, data center service provider. And many years ago, I worked for Aspen Pharmacare, so I've had my schooling in the pharmaceutical sector as well. And likewise, I'm looking forward to this engagement. Thanks, everybody.
And as you said that, Stavros, his ears pricked up, so I'll allow you to introduce.
I saw that, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I also want to mention, Kapil, I've done my research on millennial studies. So I do think the generational perspective might be interesting when we talk about preferences of our clients or the people that we serve within the industry. So we're talking about millennials, Gen Zs, as well as Gen Alphas. So yeah, maybe I can bring some of that thought into the discussion as well.
Thank you, Candice. Over to you, Stavros.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure after that millennial comment that I should be commenting at all, right? So that's why I quickly took my glasses off to try and look a bit younger if I can. So colleagues, good afternoon. My name is Stavros Nicolaou, and I'm the Group Senior Executive responsible for strategic trade at Aspen Pharmacare Holdings. So I work for the holdings company, and that represents all the various affiliates and subsidiaries of Aspen around the world. We are presently in 60 markets globally, have manufacturing on every single continent, and an active presence in over 30 of those 60 markets. I'm here, I think, in a dual capacity today. So I serve, I've explained my Aspen role, but I also serve as the chairman of the Business Unity South Africa Health Policy Committee, and also chairman of the local pharmaceutical manufacturers called Pharmisa, and great pleasure to participate in this seminar today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stavros. And finally, we have Bob Pardesi. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Kapil, and good afternoon to the colleagues and other attendees that have joined. It's great to be here. By way of introduction, my name is Bob Pardesi. I am the Corporate Services Executive Manager at the Health and Welfare Sector Education Training Authority. Prior to that, so in short, I do have about 20 years experience in the health sector, having worked as the HR manager at the National Health Laboratory Services as well as Group HR at ER24. And 10 years here at the health and welfare sector. my current roles and focuses has actually taken a new direction in that I do head up a number of divisions at the organization. That is, I head up the IT division, the marketing and comms division, the HR division, logistics and offices as well. So it's quite a varied role, and I think that has enabled me to actually build on my knowledge and expertise in terms of my forte in HR and how it can contribute and make a meaningful impact in the health sector. So currently, with changes in the environment, the health sector being a highly regulated one in every part, from the time you don a uniform or a stethoscope, everything is regulated. So, trying to find those gaps and opportunities that we, or the areas of strength that we could, at the end of the day, just providing better service delivery for our people. Thanks, Kapil.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, a highly regulated environment, and you would expect so, right? You're dealing with lives, right? You're not dealing with machinery. But who knows? Maybe in the future, machinery might be involved. So, guys, let me just start off with. So, I'm going to look this way, and I'm going to look this way because I've got another screen with various questions and research items on. And on this screen, I've got my panelists in front of me. So, please forgive me if you see me alternating between the two. So, I'm going to start off with some easy questions, guys. The first question is to Sibasiso. Sibasiso, you're an HR manager at a hospital. A hospital is a very important place for us, especially in a time of need. How have you seen the decision-making processes in HR change in this post-COVID era?
Well, Kapil, I think the biggest challenge that we've been having, it's quite historic, is retaining our nurses. We have this challenge where nurses are now moving to foreign countries, which are, to my view, are more tech-savvy, where they learn a lot of skills while they're in those specific countries. But when it comes to a time where they have to now return back to South Africa, it becomes more of a challenge in then transferring that knowledge that they would have learned in those countries. And one of them would have been Dubai, which is where we lose most of our nurses. So that is one of our main challenges. But fortunately, Netcare has been on the forefront of introducing an app called Care On. I'm not sure if anyone has ever heard of it, where patient records are kept, where we also manage our admission processes. So we are actually one of the first privately owned hospital groups that are using that program. But we have got other groups that are following suit. So those nurses that have been working in foreign countries come to Netcare with the knowledge of how to work the IT or AI systems that we are gradually introducing to the market to manage certain data that doctors can easily use.
Thanks, Sibasiso. I want to go to Theo now. Theo, you do a lot of work in the IT space, particularly the information space around IT, and you work with data. There's a mountain of data that's being created just by our basic activities as human beings. Now, when you shift that activities, particularly in the health space, is there anything you are finding that's rather intriguing or interesting to know about the data collection in your space?
The sort of proliferation of data being created across various sources, everything from wearable devices to tracking other behaviors across applications, seeing how people interact on channels, picking up on certain sort of patterns, whether it be for marketing use cases or servicing use cases, has really sort of increased the volume and the amount of volume of data as well as the amount of use cases potential around the collection of customer data. What is something that needs to be taken into account, though, with regards to all of these possibilities around the types of data that's now available around people's health and so on, is where, firstly, how do you protect the privacy of those individuals while you are collecting the data? How do you keep that data private, as well as matched to the correct person? It becomes quite tricky trying to sometimes match data up to the right people. So there's a lot of traps inherent there. So a lot of the excitement, I think, in a bigger corporation around what you could do with the data is slightly muted by the fact that you have to tread very carefully as to how you manage, collect, and then use that data. So that's a very important aspect of that.
Thank you, Theo. I'm going to circle back to you in a few moments' time. Bob, maybe just over to you. What sort of trends are you seeing in the healthcare space at the moment that perhaps did not exist, say, 4 or 5 years ago, and particularly around healthcare professionals and the adoption of technology?
Thanks, Kapil. The changes that we have seen have been quite significant over the last few years. And I think that, our country has to a certain extent lagged behind and, trying to play a bit of a catch up in terms of using technology. So I've been working very closely with a colleague who's a professor in the US. And when I look at where they have gone in terms of healthcare, and strange enough, he's an ex-South African, it's actually quite scary, which we are actually, or I'm actually trying to, get buy-in and participation in. So, for example, we look at the initially as our organization, the CETA, it was just funding medical, practitioners, everybody related in that profession, together with social health. And it was at a very, very elementary level. And so you have a case where there is suddenly an abundant supply of skill at a particular level, but where the skill is actually required is lacking. And this we have picked up through analyzing various publications, as well as conducting research to actually identify how do we actually move our healthcare offering to a better space. So, for example, we're looking at things like patient records. If you have the misfortune of visiting a public hospital, you will know the trauma that you would actually go through before you actually get seen. From the time to give in your name, to collect a file, to go and wait in another department, etc., etc. And, there are systems that are there that can be used to actually digitize these records and make them readily accessible and available. So, for example, in the US, what they do is they've got a little credit card size of a chip, which has got all your records on it. And by consent, when you actually give that in to whichever health practitioner, they can pick up everything, your condition, your health needs, etc., etc., which I believe can drastically reduce waiting time as well as costs. You look at the number of personnel that are involved in that whole process, from the person that's taking your name, and it's just one example, and I can give millions at this stage, that is taking your name, is then someone is recording it, then somebody is scratching in cupboards to kind of find a file, and then somebody directing. It really is. So adapting technology, and in our learning programs, we are more focused and moving in that direction where we're making courses available online. And it's probably one of the first where we are looking at skills courses that are being developed by professionals that could be spread across throughout the country and make easily accessible. So currently we have like our career portals, we have our media platforms, etc., where we attract learners. And once again, this is also important because the quality of people and the type of personnel you attract in order to develop throughout the country makes a huge difference in healthcare. So we are a little fortunate in the urban areas where certain facilities, certain services are, but go out into a deep rural area, it's actually shocking. So we are working with various institutions to actually identify specific needs that they have and offer these things online, because what we've realized is that almost every person in this country has a smartphone, and we need to embrace that equipment and that technology in order to reach and to educate and to actually develop. So just in closing is that it's a lot of these ideas. We need the buy-in of businesses, because at the end of the day, when they submit their workplace skills plan as well as the annual training report, these are the things that need to come, that we would like to do that. And we are actually prepared to actually fund these kind of initiatives so that the service offering is better and we keep in touch with what is going on around us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. There's 2 points that you mentioned that I'm going to speak to Dr. Candice and Dr. Storos about. But let's go to Candice first. There seems to be a frustration, Candice, in this space that adoption of technology is happening at a less than desired rate. Why do you think, if I look at Discovery, right? If I look at Aspen, if I look at all these companies, they are next level when it comes to adoption of technology. But then you go to a hospital, and as Bob has explained, it's a bit of a nightmare sometimes. Why do you think that is? What gaps do we have in the market that has caused this frustration for us?
Thank you, Kapil. My thoughts around that would be organizational culture. In order for Discovery to do what Discovery does, that's prioritizing, rewarding, celebrating innovation. There's a space for it. There's a certain mentality. They recruit for people who values innovation as well. I think also, when we talk technology and if we look at the workforce, we have to look at the age of the workforce, specifically in the medical industry. It's typically older generation, whereas in your traditional sort of corporate organizations, you have young people coming in at 22, 23, where medical doctors, they've got to do 37 years. So one has to acknowledge that as well. And then how we navigate the changes is crucial. One has to recognize that within the medical or pharmaceutical space, the tolerance for mistakes are fairly low because of the high risk that it includes. And so that can also contribute to maybe the risk adverseness of adopting. But I think just linking to what Bob had said, there is a huge plight in our communities where people are sitting from 5 o'clock, standing outside a hospital from 5 o'clock in the morning at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, spend an entire day at a day hospital because one has to look for a file, the file is missing, there isn't historic data, or whatever the case may be. So I think there's quite a number of factors that contribute to us adapting slowly to technology, but I think it's going back to the essence of values. It's going back to the administrative staff and understanding what is my purpose here. My purpose is to serve humanity. My purpose isn't to uphold the rigid processes, but my purpose is to make a difference and add value. If that gogo, that auntie, that old senior citizen is having to sit there in pain, what can I do to alleviate that in my own way, even if it's an administrative task? Kapil, I'm hoping I'm answering your question. I think organizational culture has a huge role to play. I think generational differences, a huge role to play. I think the connection between individual purpose and organizational purpose has a role to play. I think also re-engineering the value system of the workforce coming in is the reminder of humanity. If you have the ability to lessen someone else's pain or frustration, what would hold you back from actually doing that? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Candice. Definitely on point there. I'm going to come to Dr. Stavros. Leading on from the last two panelists' answers, how, and I want to touch on NHI, right? What are the key features of NHI? Universal coverage from a single fund, comprehensive services. It'll cover a range of health services, including primary care, hospitalization, specialist care, and maybe even preventative services. There's going to be this private-public sector collaboration, and the focus will be on primary health care. How do you see, and I'm not here to say that this is right or wrong, or neither are you, but I want you to explain to the audience, given the circumstances we find ourselves in, particularly in the public sector, how can we navigate this NHI and get to a place that is better for all South Africans?
Yeah, that is a highly complex question that would probably require 2 hours, and I'm going to try and cover it in 4 minutes. Okay. So I think the starting point here is to recognize that there are significant swathes of inequality in healthcare in our country. I mean, we know this, so what you get in the private sector is very different to the healthcare cover and or services you receive in the public sector. And NHI is the establishment of a single fund, and that fund would be a single purchaser, a single buyer, using economies of scale, with a financing pooling mechanism that would attempt to equalize the healthcare in the country, or the healthcare services in the country. So the objective of NHI, which I must stress is a fund, it's nothing more than that. There are many things that flow after the fund. So the objective is a very noble one. However, one needs to look at some of the practical considerations. And these practical considerations, from a private sector perspective, can sort of be covered in 3 main areas of concern and or challenges, as we call it. The first area is, how does one finance NHI? So if you are going to move into a package of benefits across 62 million people, that largely reflects what the private sector benefits are at the moment. The cost estimates, and various people have done these cost estimates, is anything from 500 billion to, I saw something at 1.2 trillion yesterday. So I think we all know what the fiscal position of the country is, and as much as government are saying this is an iterative and it's a progressive a milestone-driven exercise, it does require funding, and one would need to question, where does that funding come from? And government have advanced that funding would come either from VAT or personal taxes or pay as you earn. And there are various percentages floating around. We don't have time to cover that, but that's the first concern. The second concern is the package of benefits that patients would receive. So if you're on a package A at the moment, yourself, Kapil, which covers orthopedics and ophthalmology, so you can go and get your glasses once a year, whatever it is, that's covered. You would arguably step down to a lower package of benefits, and some have questioned both the constitutionality of that and also what does that do to investor confidence in the investor environment in the country, because many companies offer this as a package of benefits as an enticement to employ the best people, retain skills and talent, and what does it do to that, and what does it do to investor confidence is the question. Then the third final area of concern is that if this goes to the Constitutional Court, and we know that it's Solidarity have already launched legal proceedings here, if it goes in that direction and it intensifies, and we know how long these matters go on in the courts, are we not missing an opportunity to start addressing through other mechanisms the health inequality, such as the Health Market Inquiry made certain recommendations on making private healthcare more affordable? And that's why I'm stressing that the problem doesn't only sit in the public sector. There are inefficiencies in the private sector as well. But there's a whole market inquiry that was done with various recommendations. Not a single one of those has been adopted yet. There's a great opportunity to move into low-income low-income medical scheme options, or LCBOs as we call them. And that could bring into private play 5 to 10 million, either informally, formally employed belly buttons, as we call it, or unemployed belly buttons. You could bring 5 to 10 million in primary care. That will reduce the burden on the public sector. It will stretch the public sector health rand significantly more. So there are those type of interventions, many more, by the way. I'm just citing two. So if you're going to have this delayed, protracted legal process, are you not better off working in parallel to try and bring in some of these equalizing measures, if I can call it that? I think it makes perfect sense to me, certainly. So now let me just conclude, because you asked me how do we navigate this? That was the key word. Now, you can navigate this in two ways. You can either go the legal route, and there will be many other entities that will no doubt, if they've indicated they're going to pull the trigger at the appropriate time. And incidentally, you don't have to litigate now, by the way. You can litigate in a year's time. There's no hard and fast rule that as soon as a bill becomes an act that you've got to litigate at that point in time. So I'm expecting a lot more litigation, and the consequences of that will be exactly what I said. There's an alternate option, and that alternate option is that you can still weigh up your legal challenges as a private sector if you wish. But there's also an opportunity to sit around a table and look at, there are many areas that the private sector and business, I'm going to wear my Busa hat for a minute. There are many areas, in most areas of the Act, that we're in agreement with. There are a couple of areas we're not, because we believe we should have a multi-purchase, a multi-payer system. And we should work through those areas with the health department, with health practitioners in the room, and try and identify those problematic areas. Can they be resolved through some form of collaboration? Or do we propose alternatives that can be taken back to Parliament? Because an act can be amended. So if we don't like Section 33 and the health department, the new winds of political change are coming to the fore, if they feel that there is room or scope to review some of these things, then we should be looking at something that works for both sides, or some type of a middle ground. So these are the options that are open in terms of navigating. So either you go the full legal route, or you do in parallel to full legal, or in isolation to legal. You can sit down and try and work through some of these areas. I favor the latter option, incidentally, and I'm hoping many of my other colleagues will too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, I think it's a minefield of exploration, understanding, technicalities, legislative and legal issues that we unfortunately have to navigate for the first time in our country regarding the healthcare system. But I want to turn my attention to medical aids and NHI. And now that I've asked all of you a question, anyone is welcome to answer the following questions. What roles could medical aid businesses play under an NHI? Could they be administrators of the NHI? Could they bring expertise to the NHI, which is, as you said, a fund, Stavros? In essence, it's a fund with noble intentions, because a lot of people received lengthy emails the day the bill was signed, or the day after the bill was signed, to say, guys, don't cancel your medical aid type of thing. So I thought that was quite funny, but I think that's a lot to do with the lack of education around how the NHI is designed to work. So anybody want to take a stab at that? How can medical aids take advantage of this opportunity if it's seen that way? Don't leave me hanging.
Yeah, Kapil, if I can, maybe just, add to that, as well as how do we navigate through this year. There's an old wise saying that says, you can't put a square in a round circle. And, here we're sitting with NHI at a historic moment. It's time to just take a step back and just look at the healthcare offering that we have. I mean, how it's differentiated, primary and so forth. But rather look at maybe proactive versus reactive, because all of these things are reactive. Your medical aid purchases are all grudge purchases. So how do we shift the mind to say, let's look at creating a healthy country that is able to mitigate huge medical costs at the end of the day. So, for example, I have seen technology work where a patient, is able to check his or her ECG at any time, anywhere, as long as they've got access to a smartphone. But what do we in our country do? We wait until we can't breathe or we have a heart attack. We go to a doctor who then refers us to a surgeon who then does a test which costs a few thousand rands, that's your ECG, to tell you that you had that heart attack or you had a clot or a blockage somewhere. But yet there is technology there which costs zilch to actually prevent that from happening, where you are able to self-monitor that. We've seen, like with the smartwatches, the capabilities, BP, heart rate, and all of these things. So why don't we enhance these things and use part of this funding to actually make these tools accessible, so that from a cost perspective, things should drop a bit, and it can thereafter be channeled into proper medical care that is required. And that is driven by a thinking to say that in the life cycle of an individual, you change. So typically you'll find your young, healthy, energetic people are loath to medical aids or contributing to anywhere in there. But the fact is that as one ages, then it becomes a necessity. So there are these gaps in between cycles that we can analyze and look at and say, right, I mean, we hear it when it comes to unemployment. We have a youth, a large number that's unemployed. I mean, that should give you some direction to what your health status is in the country, But yet we want to pump money into areas that may not necessarily be the right thing. So it's just a different perspective in terms of how do we approach it, how do we identify it. And then I'm sure yeah, we will be on the right track. But once again, as I said in my opening remarks, if you take a square and try to put it into a circle, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Thanks, Bob. Maybe I want to just turn my attention to Netcare and CISO. There's again touching on NHI because I think it's important to create public awareness around the realities of it. Private healthcare providers like Netcare, and I'm just making assumptions here. It's very new fields for us. Sorry, Stavros, I see your hand now. You want to comment on what Bob was saying before I take my question on CISO?
Yeah, sure. So, not to interject too much, but I think what Bob was building on was some of the practical considerations on how we bridge this gap and this divide between private and public sector. And I think he also started touching on some of the solutions. So when I sort of ended off my commentary earlier, I said I kind of favored an approach where we try and sit down with the health department, and in fact there are proposals around that to the team that's been allocated. And there would be colleagues from Netcare and Discovery, that team, that we try and navigate through some of these things. And navigating means that you put some firm, concrete proposals on the line, how you're going to bridge that inequality gap. Now, digitalization, which is what Bob spoke about extensively, is one of those measures. It's probably one of the most important levers or instruments to bridging that gap. And he's given some practical examples. Let me give one other practical example. Right now, we lament, as do many other countries around the world, the shortage of healthcare workers in our country. And I'm not going to rattle off the statistics, they're well known. And you've got this rearranging of the deck chairs. So Australia steals South African doctors, and the US steals Australian doctors, and so it's like a merry-go-round, right? And everybody's stealing each other's doctors. In our own country, in the public sector, now I've got a daughter in fourth year medicine, and she started doing these ward rounds now. You get exposed when you're fourth year, they give you the most menial tasks to do in these ward rounds. And you can spend 10 or 15 minutes trying to find a patient's records. Okay, and sometimes you find it and sometimes you don't. And if you don't find it, you've got to take a whole history all over again. Sometimes you get it wrong. You forget that the patient's allergic to penicillin, and then they get an anaphylactic reaction. Okay, so what am I saying? With digitalization, digitally recorded, you don't have to spend 10 minutes as a nurse running around trying to find a file. You're not going to get all these iatrogenic adverse events like the one I just described now, where a patient develops anaphylaxis and then they get hospitalized, and it drains the healthcare system, increases the burden, it makes the doctors and nurses less efficient, all of those things. So maybe you only need half the doctors we are saying we need, because you can save half their time through digital solutions. So this is the type of healthcare CODESA, I think, that we're seeing, that we're talking so much about CODESA and governments and national unity at the moment. I think kind of a CODESA for healthcare would be very useful to try and understand what are the technologies, the platforms, what are the instruments, the resources, the capacity that we've got across the two sectors, and how do we best utilize this. Now, this happened during COVID, because Netcare, for example, was taking on public sector patients by arrangement during COVID. Not a lot, but it did this. So I think we need to seize ourselves with what are, on a joint basis, the best practical things we can do right now to bridge those gaps. And digitalization is one of the most important in my view. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stavros. Yeah, I think digitization, not just in healthcare, but in any areas, are going to streamline the operations and make a lot of things more cost efficient. but thanks for that comment. Coming back to you, Sibusi, so we were talking about potential collaboration between private and public healthcare hospitals somewhere in the future, when it's near or far away, I'm not sure. How do you see that working? Because Netcare is a well-established group. You know your policies, you've got a tried and trusted method, and now you're going to have to deal with, or you might have to collaborate with public hospitals. How do you see that happening? Or is this something you started talking about? Is it something you're planning for? What's your thoughts around this?
So, Kapil, I think it goes two ways in my view. There's the initial sharing of human capital between the private and public healthcare center. And with the current shortage of nurses which we have in the country, it's going to become a huge challenge. How do we share those resources between the two sectors? That's our first challenge. I think the second challenge, I think Netcare, as I mentioned earlier, is that we've been able to compress large data of medical records into a tablet. Now, I don't think we'd have a problem in sharing that information with the private healthcare sector, for public healthcare sector, but how do they share the medical records of their own patients in government hospitals? What sources or what programs do they have in place? I'm not privy to that type of information. So some form of engagement between the two sectors would have to take place. But unfortunately, we haven't received any guidelines of how the whole NHI system is actually going to work, even though it is signed off.
You would imagine that in order for this bill to be truly successful, there has to be some realignment and perhaps some reorganization in the healthcare infrastructure space for this to actually work. Otherwise, it could be a nightmarish experience. I'm going to move on to my next question, and again, I'm going to stick to the NHI aligned theme. And if I look at, let's just look at pharmaceutical businesses. With the NHI, you would think that they would be able to have a larger exposure of their medication to a larger part of the population. Is that a correct assumption, or am I smoking my socks and thinking too fancy and trying to increase your sales for no reason?
Okay, Kapil, presumably you're directing that to me because I think I'm the only pharma person here, right? So I'm not going to tell you what you're smoking, but let me rather just respond directly. So the thing here is that there are two aspects to the response. The first aspect is that we have moved into a new pharmaceutical era. It's an era of bespoke, customized, tailored medicines. So let's just take cancer as an example. Today, cancer is treated not only through radiotherapy and chemotherapy as it was in the old days, or sometimes there's a surgical excision of part of an organ or whatever. Today, we've moved into the era of immunotherapy, which means you stimulate the host's immune system to a foreign body, the foreign body being the cancerous cell in this instance. But this is very customized, and you cannot take one immunotherapy drug and apply it as a one-size-fits-all. You have to test the patient's biomarkers, and that will tell you which of those 50 or 100 immunotherapies that are available are specific to that particular patient. So it's become that customized. But anything that is bespoke enough comes with a heftier price tag. But it saves lives, it reduces the burden on the healthcare system, and it overall leads to cost savings. So that's the one aspect. The other aspect is that governments across the world, not only in our country, are faced with increasing demand, more expensive drugs, but budget cuts. And it's not just in our country, it's across the world. Now, you've got to find the balance between these two. If we move into a downscaled essential drug list, which is what is potentially envisaged, then we need to understand we will only get the older drugs, and you cut out potentially room for new cutting edge technologies like what I've just explained to you. And these drugs are called monoclonal antibodies. I'm going to save you all the names, right? It's not a pharmacology lecture, this, but you've got these monoclonal antibodies are highly effective, but they are customized because there might be 100 of them. And Bob needs one, and Candace needs one, and Spoon needs one. They might need different ones. Okay, so that's the trade-off we're going to have to make. Is if we move into a very basic essential drug list, we shut the door to more advanced medicines like immunotherapies, and very hard to open that door once you shut it. And those companies will withdraw their products from South Africa because there just won't be a market for them here. But then we've got to be satisfied with using older medicines. So that's kind of the trade-off that we've got to find here. And I think, again, the answer lies in sitting around the table. I think if you've got a dual funder, dual purchaser system, as is presently the case, there's a cross-subsidy that applies, and then you can make these drugs available, not without challenges at an access level, but at least you've got some availability at an access level. It's a difficult and complex area to solve, but the bottom line here is, Kapil, if the horse bolts and these products leave the country, they leave forever. They don't usually come back. And that's the caution here around going in with an essential drug list, which is presently what's proposed in the Act. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stavros. I want to maybe talk about, leading on from Bob's point, which is very important at the time, is embracing technology to inform the bill and to inform the decision making and shape how this is implemented going forward. Theo, maybe if I can go to you, what kind of data are you collecting from wearable technology, right? And what value can it actually serve in shaping the way an NHI works?
So I want to answer your question slightly differently to start off with. Maybe I can give you close to a proper answer to your actual question. But coming back to the idea of digitization within the medical sector and how it is time consuming at the moment to be retrieving manual records, etc. There's this. Are you obviously all aware of the hype cycle around generative AI and people being quite wary that AI is going to replace their job and so forth, right? It is. I see AI as another technology, which is another tool, and tools have for millennia made humans' life easier, right? 50 years ago, we didn't necessarily have hot showers in our houses. We didn't all drive cars. All of these technological advances have saved us time and has advanced humanity, right? Of course, technology can be used for bad purposes too, but let's take that out of the equation. Now, it is quite scary to think that in an age where we are talking about AI replacing jobs, a medical professional has to manually search for a physical document, right? So I think what is a very important aspect for us to focus on with regards to digitization, which I think there's something very strong in there to look at how, if we're scared that it's going to replace people's jobs, we should be focusing on how digitization can save medical practitioners time, and that there's something very powerful in focusing on that to derive more value out of that sort of discipline and just making people's jobs easier, which would allow them to do more, not necessarily replace them. We already have a shortage of medical staff. So a very important factor to consider there is how do we share data amongst these different entities. And it is a very tricky aspect. You've got things to consider like POPI. There's breaches of data. So it's not a complex. It's a very complex environment. But when you solve how do you share data meaningfully between these entities, I do believe that would drive digital adoption, because it doesn't help you digitize something, but it doesn't have the right information. A digital device that gives you junk information is meaningless. It's all about the information, it's a very important focus point for industry and government would be to look at how we deal with data sharing. I think that's an important aspect. What do we collect? I mean, there's definitely the two obvious ones. Your devices that you wear for fitness, and your devices around car and how you drive, etc. In the insure business. Coming back to sort of NHI and that making people healthier, rather than focusing on being a reactive business. Again, it is how we collect data from people's wearable devices and how we look at driving people's overall health through vitality. Again, very powerful, right? So that if you do want to look at proactive health within a government sort of an overall health context, you would need to be able to collect people's health information again in a meaningful way. Probably share that. And definitely keep it secure. I think let me pause there.
Also, for sure. I think your answer just spurs more questions in my view, because there are even more advanced ways that we could using technology to really inform the correct practices around the implementation of this bill. I'm going to move on to Candice, and I'm calling you guys out because when I asked you a generic question, no one wanted to answer. So forgive me for calling you guys out. Candice, we already have seemingly a shortage of healthcare staff in South Africa. We have, with nurses, as Sabusiso indicated earlier, and doctors, and the great immigration, and so forth. How do we rectify this? Is there something wrong with our system? And surely with an active NHI, it's going to place an increased demand in the resources and skills needed in healthcare. And right now we have a shortage. So how's that going to work?
Thanks, Kapil. I think, what baffles my mind is the unemployment rate, and I think Bob mentioned it earlier on. The statistics, last time I checked, was standing on 42%. And if that doesn't give any one of us sleepless nights in terms of the next generation, then I worry, because we have a skills shortage in this industry, but also in other industries if we're thinking about engineers. So we've got the talent. Africa is known to have the youngest talent. Our continent has the youngest talent in the world, and I think, Kapil, the challenge here is about the foresight and planning. I run an NPO called Releasing Eagles, and it's focusing on mentorship and coaching. And one of the things that I recognized is that, if each professional take on a younger person, walk alongside that person, give some hope, give some direction, some vision. Unfortunately, that process takes about a 5-year period, depending on when you find that person. But I think it's not just the private sector's responsibility. It's not just government's responsibility. It is not just the responsibility of NPOs. It's a collective responsibility to close the skills gap in our country. And I believe one of the ways that we can do so is if each one of us become active in finding a young person and inspiring hope and guiding them towards a certain way of a path of study, depending on their passion and purpose. I think further to that is also we see this talent exit. There's many of you online may know of a person who had left the country and they may have come back. There is a certain talent also that experiences that there is no place such as home. It's not always moonshine and roses when you are a foreigner in a different country. I've lived in different countries and back home, and now you find that there's a term that is called fractional talent. That means that people will hold more than one job occupation, will be employed by more than one organization. So that is another trend that is coming up. If you don't know the term, look up the term fractional talent. We're also working and operating in a gig economy. And so the younger people, they are also very curious, and therefore they may hold multiple careers within their lifespan. So Kapil, I think perhaps my answer to that question is in a form of an appeal to everybody online is, given our unemployment rate, is to ask yourself, what can I do in my personal capacity to bring forth an answer here? Like I said, I run an NPO, and one of the things in my personal capacity I decided to do is to register a learnership around unemployment, creating essential skills, workplace readiness programs, as well as new venture creation. And if you look at medicine meeting AI, and I think somebody said it earlier on, some of our young people, in fact, about two weeks ago, I sat across a medical student, and she's in her 5th year, and she's like, Candice, I don't think I'm going to finish my studies. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why would you come so far and not want to finish? And she said, what I envisioned this to be is not what it's panning out to be. And just opening up the conversation around AI and pivoting, all of a sudden it shifted, it gave her a different kind of motivation. And so, long way around, but to say, keep the youth in mind. When we're talking about skills exiting, don't just focusing on those leaving, let's focus also on the talent that is around us. How do we nurture them? How do we mobilize them? How do we encourage them to meet the needs in our country?
No, for sure. Thanks, Candice. And perhaps leading on to that, Sibusiso, I want to come to you. I got two questions to ask you. Number one, we see the value of technology in healthcare. First question is, are you starting to now hire these tech experts in healthcare, or are there requests coming to your desk to say, I need a guy in blockchain, or I need a guy in virtual medication, or remote patient monitoring? That's number one. Number two, and maybe I'm not sure what the level of sensitivity around this question is. Considering our schooling system and the gap between our schooling system and the tertiary system, are we seeing a better crop of doctors coming into the healthcare space, or are things getting worse? So just a generic question for somebody who's working in the space and actually hiring those doctors.
So I think to answer your first question, the recruitment of specialized IT personnel still lies with our head office. But I think with the recently introduced Care-On system, we have tried to find people who have the expertise in IT. Just to add to that, if we were to focus on the concept of cross-training, I think it's a reality we are facing that certain positions will become redundant at some stage. Finding people who have a passion in IT, but who are not currently working in IT, we try and train them in fields or in getting skills which would assist us should certain positions become redundant, just to transition or move them over into those positions. And it would help if we were to look internally to find people who would be able to find new passions that we can upskill or grow. So to answer the first question, yes, the company as Medcare, we are looking at appointing or building our IT infrastructure. I don't really know at this stage in terms of NHI how far we are in that scope. And to answer your second question, if we were to look at or compare the curriculum between our private nursing colleges as well as the public nursing colleges, I don't think the two curriculums speak to each other. If you were to compare the quality of healthcare of nurses who come from government and work agency through our own hospitals, there's a contrast between the two. So if you were to focus on having a collaborative relationship between private and public training for our nurses, and I think that's where Bob would come in, just to maybe advise on where can we close that gap when it comes to training our nurses and trying to speak the same language between private and public healthcare.
Sure. Oh, thanks.
Bob, yeah, sure, Kapil. Yeah. You see, the challenge is in how we phrase the requirements. So I think over the past few years, we've been hearing there's a shortage of nurses. We do understand that the nurses play a highly critical role in hospital. So we've been pumping out or funding a number of nurses. However, when we do a follow-up with these students who have qualified, you find that they are unemployed. And then when you start delving further into that, you find that the type of nurse that is required, or there is a shortage, is at a different level. It's either at a scrub nurse, a theater nurse, or one of those sections. But in the meantime, what has happened is that because one is not specific and just says, there's a shortage of nurses, then, you attempt to fill a void without really dissecting and understanding what that problem is. Furthermore, we've consulted with the HPCSA as well as the Nursing Council. Now, you have different ideologies at place. You have an institution that wants to protect the profession. Then you have another institution that's making requirements difficult and they can't really see eye to eye. And what happens is that it lands onto the ground and you experience all of these types of unforeseen, unheard, untold challenges. So yes, if there is a shortage or if there is a current crop that has been RPL and is certified competent, etc., then let's put in the training interventions to get them to the level that is required so that we know what skill we are actually looking for. Thanks, Kapil.
Well, thanks for that, Bob. Stavros, I want to come to you, and perhaps the last point I'll touch on regulation is, potentially regulation changes could see you standardize a lot of your pricing, right? Especially if you want to access a larger market and larger volumes. Is that something you guys have been having conversations around? Have you applied your minds to that, particularly in the pharmaceutical space?
Yeah, pharmaceuticals and medical devices diagnostics are rather unique because we are the only two sectors that actually operate in both the private and the public sector. So if you think about it, the other people on this call, the healthcare funders, for example, are only, they service the private sector. The private hospitals, most of the time service private sector patients, etc., etc. Right? So we're in this unique position that we supply medicines to both the public and the private sector, and you don't really have an access issue. So it's not like if a patient doesn't, presents at Chris Hani Barra dispensary, they're not going to get medication. they'll get medication. The problem is, are they getting access to the same medication that you would get in the private sector? So that's the challenge. But the corollary to that is, you can service all 50 or 52 million public sector patients, because that's how many the public sector covers, precisely because you've got the subsidy between the private and the public sector. So what you pay for in the private sector is very different to what the government buys these drugs for. So because you've got that subsidy, that's why you can service 62 million people in the country. Now, if you disrupt that subsidy, and that's why I was saying we don't necessarily favor a single payer, single purchaser, because you're not really going to get massive savings from economies of scale and be able to procure at scale. There's not going to be much difference, to be honest. But you can disrupt the subsidy that all of us on this call presently enjoy. And that's the concern. So you've got to find a model that allows you to bring in both the new technologies, like I said earlier, but also doesn't disrupt the most basic of medication that is needed in primary care in the public sector. And you can only do that if there is a dual payer, dual purchaser system.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate that one. Guys, I think we've come almost to the end of our webinar, and it's been a very insightful one with a varied range of topics that we've discussed. Maybe if I can just ask each one of you to maybe just summarize your views in terms of navigating the generic challenges in healthcare in the next short to medium future. So maybe if we can just start with you, Bob, and then we'll go to Super Fiso and then Candace, and then Stavros, and last but certainly not least, Dino.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a journey. For one has to recognize. Secondly, is identifying what exactly are the needs of people as well as the professions itself, because there are overlaps, etc., which actually at the end of the day it drives costs, and come up with ways in which to drive down the cost of medical care, because at the rate that at the price that it is going up, it's going to become scary, and one day we all will be sitting in the same boat, battling to afford healthcare, which is a right in as is enshrined in our constitution. So let's look at the professions, let's look at the offering and see where there are synergies that one could actually exploit in order to get a better fit that would suit our unique environment. And if that has to change, and that's why initially I started off by saying it's a highly regulated industry. And yes, the regulations must be there to protect lives. But at the same time, the regulations should allow for leeway where there is cross-pollination without compromising medical standards. Just as a very, very quick example, and this is a very personal one. I mean, I was shocked at the cost of dental implants. It's crazy. But here's the process. One, you see the dentist, you pay a consult. Two, he refers you to a specialist, because only a specialist or a maxillo is able to drill the bone. Nobody else can. Got it? So you see that specialist. You look at that chain there. The dentist already has taken an X-ray. The maxillo has already done that X-ray. Great. Then there is a mold to, there is titanium, what you call implants to be inserted. Good Lord, I actually had to ask the guy, really? I've got more titanium in my car and it does not cost a fraction of this. But yes, no, it has to come from the lab or the supplier. Thereafter, it's back for insertion. Thereafter, guess what? You've got to now go back to a dental surgeon who's got to make implants. And there's another consult. There's another x-ray that's taken. There's your whole thing put out there. That's thereafter sent to the lab. Thereafter, it comes back to you to there. Then you kind of go in for a fitting. By the time you finish the process, let me bring it back to my technology that I'm so fascinated about. It's on trial currently in the US. Here's the procedure for that particular thing. It's a one-stop where the patient walks in, sits on a chair. The robot controls everything from opening the mouth to the extraction of the tooth, the drilling of the hole, the insertion of the implant. Whilst that is happening, the information has been sent. There is a processing room in the background that actually makes the implant at the same time. Thereafter, robotics, both into the patient, out you walk. A few hours later. I mean, compared to a particular process which would take you a long time with cost. So using that as an example to say, let's look at our processes, let's look at our medical requirements, let's ensure that we do not negotiate on the ethics as well as the professional role that has to be played. But let's get the efficiencies, and the efficiencies are really out there. A closing one on what was indicated about the NHI that I wanted to actually come in. There's a huge concern that there's going to be sole supplier. If it sits in government, understand these regulations. There's the national treasury regulations that have to be followed. There's procurement regulations. And I can assure you from what we read, and it's public knowledge, the cost of goods in via government procurement is not high, it's astronomical. So the savings you believe you may realize through a combination of schemes and pooling of resources will far outweigh that. It's just something to be aware of as has been out there. But I think we are on the right road. We probably may not be traveling at the speed we'd like to, but hopefully discussions of this nature would give birth to further discussions around getting efficiencies in the healthcare system. Thanks, Kapil. That's my closing remarks.
Thanks, Bob. You know, there's this law, it's called Moore's Law. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with it, where it says the development of technology doubles every, I think, 18 months, and the price reduces as well every 24 months. And we found that to be purely in the tech space, right? I think looking at your dental problem, you're going to find that Moore's Law is going to apply to almost anything that can be digitized. So what is going to cost you 60,000 Rand for dental implants and maybe 2 months of toing and froing dentists and maxillofacialists and so forth, you can get done in an hour. That's Moore's Law for you. And that's how it's going to disrupt not just technology, but our technology human lives. And I'm waiting for that, because I think a lot of professionals, maybe in the healthcare or even in the legal fraternity, have taken advantage of this and have exploited the common man for many, many, many decades. I think that time is coming to an end. I mean, look at vehicles. You know, you can take a ride for $60 as opposed to buying a car for 150,000 Rand if you wanted to. But I think that's a conversation for another time. So we'll see. So over to you.
Thanks, Kapil. I think if we were to try and find strategies of getting, thanks to NHI, Bodies like South African Nursing Council, HPCSA, the likes of HWC and other relevant CETAs to continuously sit down, engage, and finding methods of retaining our current nurses that we have in our system. Also finding ways of getting nurses that have already left the country outside of immigration to come back and fill those gaps that we have as a healthcare sector, either between private healthcare or public healthcare. That would help a great deal in combating the current situation that we're in.
Thanks, Sibusiso. Candice, if I can have your closing comments, please.
Thank you, Kapil. So from our side, I would say, when there's problems or challenges, usually it calls for our purpose and our intervention. And so it does mean that we have an opportunity to make an impact and make a difference. I am passionate about mentorship and coaching, and therefore I would like to challenge, everybody on the call to consider giving of yourself in that way. We cannot underestimate the power of that. It can literally change someone's life. If we look at not just the unemployment rate in our country, but if you look at the statistics of single-parented homes and child-headed up homes, there is a space and a place for us to step in. Secondly, from a human capital perspective, is to encourage and say, to take the approach that we cannot always manage the changes that we are given, but we can certainly navigate it. And with curiosity and humility, we may actually learn something. And when we truly connect to the heart of humanity and service, we might be very surprised what we can come up with in terms of innovation. And to the leaders on the call, if you are leading people, gone are the days where we measure leadership on the basis of, if I'm not around, everything falls flat on its face. In fact, I'm of the opinion that if that has happened, you have not invested enough in the people around you to make sure that things doesn't fall by the wayside. So my challenge is to say, if you are out of the system for 5 or 10 days and things are operating without you, then maybe that is, just maybe, that is an indicator of your success, of developing the talent around you. And I just want to express and say thank you. It's been wonderful to be part of this panel. And AI is here. Let's embrace it. Let's not be afraid of it. Let's utilize it to our advantage. Thanks, Kapil.
Thank you, Candice. Stavros, your closing comments, please.
Thanks very much, Kapil. Let me firstly thank you and Regenesis for putting together such an erudite panel and for selecting such a topical theme to discuss today. I think it's extremely topical and covers many, many different facets, including the HR and the digitalization, the AI facets. I think what is best for me to do by way of closing comments is just to reinforce one or two issues I mentioned earlier. I think the first is that COVID taught us that how important healthcare is, not only from a public health perspective, but also to economies. And, necessary lives and livelihoods were lost during COVID. And I think it's given particularly the business sector a very fresh optic on healthcare. Kind of healthcare was something that it was an expense and it stayed on your balance sheet and never really thought about it. But now it affects economies and it affects businesses and sustainability thereof. So I think there's a brand new appreciation, I suspect, for the healthcare sector. And as a consequence of that, we do need to solve the many challenges, including some that Bob raised earlier, which is at this rate, both in the private and public sector, and both sectors, at this rate, everything's going to be unaffordable. And if it's unaffordable, it's completely inaccessible And inaccessible healthcare means you have unhealthy populations, and your productivity reduces, and your global competitiveness reduces with that. So I think we need to, I would presume most of the people on this call are either from business and or academia, I think. But that being the case, I think we need to look at solutions that are going to increase access, reduce costs, but also are viewed from the perspective of how do I use public healthcare in general to provide health security in our lifetime, and health security will then equal a positive impact on our economy, positive impact on the labor force, and our global competitiveness. I think that's the first point I wanted to reinforce. The second point, by way of solutions, a great proponent, protagonist, if you want to call it that, of getting the private and the public sectors working together, despite the current differences that exist. Things have escalated pre-election and became a rather polarizing discussion. The NHI, many other facets of health became very polarizing. It needn't be that way, and I think we've got one common goal here. We're all South Africans. We all want our country to succeed. We want our families and society to be healthy. And the only way you're going to get that, quite frankly, is if the two sectors sit down together, work through their differences, and only if they can't find each other, then do you contemplate pulling the trigger on litigation. So it's been a wonderful pleasure, Kapil, thank you, and to the faculty, and I'll hand back to you on that note, which is hopefully a positive note. Thanks.
Yeah, no, sure. Thanks, Stavros. A lot of food for thought there, and perhaps warrants a follow-up discussion with this panel that we see. Finally, I'm going to hand over to Theo. If you can just give us your brief closing comments, and then we can end.
Yeah. Thanks, Kapil. Apologies, my camera is not on. I had to move to mobile for the last part of the webinar. But I think from what I'm hearing, there's some of the solutions lies in a better provider, primary provider, the care provider, as well as the patient experience, and that one of the ways that care could be improved is by saving time and money to be able to direct resources to the right place, and that we see digitization as being a key driver of saving that time and money and improving the experience on both the patient and the provider side. I do want to say that to be able to digitize healthcare, you do need to share the patient record, which is a very tricky sort of area. But echoing what you're saying in terms of collaboration between the various sectors involved here, you do need to talk to each other to establish frameworks of how you're going to share this data securely within regulations, etc. Because the digitization is only going to be as meaningful as what you know about the customer, which is in this case the patient. I would say that would be it from me. Thanks, Kapil.
Well, thanks, Theo. I think the future of HR and healthcare will be shaped by digital transformation, innovative business models. You can't prevent that, and a collaborative approach towards implementing any new regulation change in NHI. I think we have a lot to think about. I think there's a lot of changes coming for this industry, and there are industries that have come before us that have been disrupted. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure that considering the stakeholders I've seen in front of me today, the industry is in good hands with some very bright minds. So gratitude to all of you. Really appreciate your contribution to this exciting webinar, and I'm looking forward to the next one. All the best, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.